Introduce Aaron Perry. He's a writer, public speaker, impact entrepreneur, consultant, artist, and father. He's the author of Why on Earth, Get Smarter, Feel Better, Heal the Planet. Aaron works with the Why on Earth community team and impact ambassadors to spread thriving and sustainability messages of hope and empowering information and inspiration to diverse communities throughout the world. He has launched companies in recycling, renewable energy, and local and organic food sectors. He's an experienced business and literary writer. Aaron holds an MA in Germanistic from the University of Colorado, where he studied philosophy, literature, environmental policy, and sustainable development. While in graduate school, he spent weekends and holidays studying permaculture and indigenous wisdom throughout the Rocky Mountain region. So, I hope you guys enjoy this talk. It's our keynote for the day. So here's Aaron Perry.
How are you guys doing today? Could somebody please check on the gentleman in the sunglasses back here? He's making me nervous. That's my friend, Nick. Well, we're going to give him a shout out in a little bit. Oh, hi, Alicia. Good to see you. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to visit with you all today. And what's happening here today and tomorrow, I think, is one of the most important kinds of things to be happening on the planet right now. And it's the kind of pattern that hopefully we're going to see expand, replicate, amplify, and spread to communities really all around the world. Today we're going to be visiting about a few different topics that, at least from my perspective, are interconnected. And it's possible they aren't yet from your perspective. Hopefully, after some time together, they will be. And we're going to be talking about biodynamic restoration. We're going to be talking about sovereignty and healing. We're going to be talking about seeds, soil, and water. And speaking of water, without any further ado, I want to say a special thank you to Elaine and to Charmaine for the invitation to be here and to visit with you all. One of the things we do through the Why on Earth community is publish podcast episodes with thought leaders and community leaders from really all around the world. And tomorrow we're actually recording with Elaine, which I'm very excited about, and Charmaine as well, here to feature Joyful Journey and what's happening here. And I think most of us who are here today understand the sacred importance of having access to healing waters. And I think we're probably all relatively well aware that there are a whole lot of people in the world who don't have that kind of access right now at this time. And we're going to talk about a couple things Why on Earth is doing to help with some of that as well. But I just thought I'd mention the word sanctuary, right? Because we really are gathered today in a sanctuary. And it seems to me, especially after I lived in New York City for a wee spell, that for us humans to have sanctuary is probably one of the more important things on a short list of how we maintain health, well-being in our lives, thriving. Now, I have the privilege and honor and responsibility of working with a number of folks in the biodynamic community here in Colorado, throughout North America, and even around the world. And one of the things that happens a lot in biodynamic discussions here in North America is we pause for a moment to think about the indigenous peoples whose territory we happen to be situated on at the moment. And these healing waters right around here have been a special gathering place for a long, long time. And some of us are aware of this history. And so I just thought I'd ask who might know which tribes tend to like to spend time right around here. Ute, yeah, thank you. Any others? Anybody know these three sisters right here?
Well, I think the Arapaho came through, a lot of them just passed through the valley.
Yeah.
These were probably the ones with the most history.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And my understanding is that other tribes would come into the valley for both the healing waters and for the hunting grounds, and that I've heard it said that the San Luis Valley back in the day was something like the Serengeti, with great herds of elk and buffalo and others roaming freely. Well, I don't know what happened with the formatting. Is that going to be an issue in general? We'll cope with it. So it's possible that the version of PowerPoint that I use to create these slides isn't the same that is on this computer, which I don't know that we'll remedy right now unless it gets really bad. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that this notion of sovereignty has been coming up a lot today and in recent years when we're talking and thinking about things like our food systems, and when we're talking and thinking and taking action with very important things like growing our own food. And there are a lot of folks in the room here who are doing really important work around these priorities. I think that it's interesting to ponder and consider the connection between sovereignty and freedom and responsibility. And that for us to truly realize the degrees of freedom and sovereignty we're capable of as human beings probably means we're cultivating a sense of responsibility commensurately. At least it seems that that's a possible hypothesis we might consider together. Now there's an asterisk here referring to us this notion that perspective and education are required when we're talking about sovereignty and freedom, okay? But then there's a double asterisk referring us to a quote by Mark Twain that says, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education, right? So when we're talking about education here, we're not necessarily talking about formal degrees, although that can be important and useful. Academia certainly has limitations as well. But education is one of these things we do in community, in conversation, in relationship with each other. And there's a whole lot of education happening here today. So it seems to me that sovereignty and freedom and responsibility are all connected with this thing we call culture. And I am thoroughly convinced that one of the great opportunities we have in our time is to reinvent our culture together. And to do that in part by referring back to many other lifeways, indigenous lifeways. And by virtue of the simple fact that we're alive on the planet today, it necessarily means that we have ancestors, each one of us, who lived in indigenous culture on this planet. And so therefore we're all, by extension, indigenous to this planet, right? That might seem obvious to some of us. It's not meant to be a discussion of semantics so much as an invitation to consider what our roots really are as human beings. And I thought, let's look into this word culture, dig into this etymology a little bit, the history of this word culture. And it comes through the mid-15th century, meaning the tilling of the land, the act of preparing the earth for crops. From Latin cultura, a cultivating agriculture, or figuratively caring culture and honoring. From the past participle stem for those Latin scholars out there of colere, to tend, to guard, to till, cultivate. So I don't know about you, but when I drop into New York City or Los Angeles and experience culture, it doesn't necessarily immediately make me think of something like agriculture. No. But indeed, that's where that word comes from. And I will share probably a few words today that might allow us to have some fun in reclaiming the true origins and histories of some of these words that we're using generally in our mainstream culture. Okay, now let's talk briefly about seeds. Seeds are pretty powerful, huh? We have a number of seed savers in the room, right? Could we get a show of hands maybe? Seed savers, yeah. Thank you for all that work you're doing. And it's so wonderful to be able to exchange seeds here. Of course, you know, there are a number of variations of a famous saying about the great oak tree coming from the tiny acorn. And that through the power and magic of DNA, the tremendous information contained within living biology, at the molecular and cellular levels, those acorns know how to become oak trees, right? And turns out there was a pretty wise Jewish teacher about 2,000 years ago, some of you may be familiar, who talked about the power of a mustard seed, right? And I don't know about you, but that's one of the smallest seeds that I know we work with. And I have a hunch that the Master JC might have been actually pointing in the direction of microbiology. He did, after all, turn water into wine, and how does that happen naturally? That requires microbiology and sun and soil and a few plants and so on. But probably at that time, one of the very smallest things we could imagine was a mustard seed that would then grow into a great bush in the course of a single season. So the power of a seed is clearly awesome and central to our lives here on this planet. Of course, we also have soil. And this is, I think, my favorite thing to talk about and write about. And it brings us to this keyword humus that is one of the 4 keywords we work a lot with when we're doing our work through the Y on Earth community. The other is this word oikos. Who's heard of Oikos? A yogurt brand, maybe? Yeah. Nick has. Right, so this word oikos, clever name for a yogurt brand, but essentially in the ancient Greek means home, and it is the root word from which our word ecology comes. It is also the root word from which our word economy comes. So when we actually understand what our words are telling us, we understand that the word economy and the word ecology are essentially saying the same thing. And it's how we take care of and manage our home. We won't go into logos and nomos right now today, but that's a really important one for us to keep in mind, I believe. So this humus is a Latin derived term related to also the word humor, the word humility, and the word human. So there's a quaternity there that I think is central to maintaining a joyful, grounded, service-oriented way of being. And of course, humus means soil. This word wele, I'll talk about a little later. That's a Middle English term. And this word adamah, anyone recognize adamah? It's not in the Hebrew here, but does anyone know this term, adamah? It's totally related to Adam, right? So adamah in the Hebrew, I was explained this by a rabbi a few years back. In the creation story of Genesis, the creation of Adam, humanity, from the soil, the clay, the adamah, right? So our languages are pointing to this very intimate relationship between the human and the soil. You could go so far as to say that many sacred languages are indicating that there is no separation between being human and our connection to the soil. So this wele, I will just throw it out, I will mention it later, but I want to just mention that this wele, this Middle English word, means well-being. And it, curiously, is the root word from which our word wealth comes. So there's one we get to help redefine together. Wealth means well-being. It doesn't seem all that obvious to me when I'm in New York City or Los Angeles that we're all necessarily tuned into that fact, but that's a fact. So we got seeds and we got soil, and of course we've got water. And here we are at a beautiful water sanctuary. A little later on at 4 o'clock, we're going to host a biodynamic soil activation water stirring ceremony together. And so we've got water from here, as well as some water that I've been collecting that has parts of it from a sacred waterfall in central New York, sacred to the Mohawk people, and a few other spots around the Rocky Mountain region. So we'll have some fun with that as well. And when we get into stirring water, we get into some of the geometry of life that shows up with folks like Da Vinci and Pythagoras and some of these very interesting characters from history. But let's talk a little about water on this continent, or this part of the continent we call the lower 48 states of the United States. This image, I don't know if it can be seen all that clearly in the back, but this is essentially an image of watersheds here in the United States, not counting Alaska and Hawaii. Right, so this great big pink one in the middle, of course, is all going into the Mississippi. This, I believe, would be the Colorado right here. Right, we've got several major watersheds with headwaters and origins right here in the state of Colorado. And we're at the headwaters of 3 or 4 pretty significant rivers here in this region. Now for some bad news. And when we're talking about sovereignty, I would propose to you all that this is about us growing our own food, yes. This is about us coming together in community and exchanging seeds, yes. This is also about us getting super educated about all the other food and beverage things we might choose to buy and consume ourselves or share with our friends and family. Because there are some very important facts about what's going on right now in our world, and in particular in this country, when it comes to how we're growing, processing, and consuming food and beverage products. So this is a map from the United States Geological Survey showing areas at risk of nitrate contamination to shallow groundwater. Okay, this means from our conventional agricultural activities. And you can see that very much of our breadbasket region, and of course certain parts of California, are at tremendous risk. Nitrate contamination is one thing, but what about glyphosate contamination? And I'm not sure if some of you are perhaps tracking what's happening with glyphosate in the research coming out of the medical community, but it's getting pretty strongly established now that glyphosate, which is a toxic pesticide chemical used in conventional agriculture, as well as in millions of yards and neighborhoods around the country, right, in the forms of things like Roundup and so on, to eradicate those pesky dandelions, right, the pestilence of the earth or whatever. This glyphosate is absolutely detrimental to the microbiology in our digestive systems and is literally undermining the roots, the ground, the soil of how our bodies maintain health and well-being. So it's getting connected to things like immune deficiency responses. It's getting connected to things like other, not only physical ailments, but also cognitive and behavioral problems, right? This is happening right now in our society, in our region, in our community. And one doesn't have to look too far to see that essentially we are, in the United States, the unwitting guinea pigs of a massive experiment in chemical agriculture, essentially. And we can get into the history of all this, what happened at the beginning of the Cold War, the end of the Second World War, a very scary time, and how our agriculture policy through the United States Department of Agriculture was part of our foreign policy, dealing with the threat, the perceived threat of communism, and all these things that went into these decisions that were made a few decades back to bring us to where we are today. We can understand the history. I think it's really important that we understand where we are right now, because I'll tell you what, if there are any other high priorities right now, it's probably going to include getting glyphosate out of the system entirely. And I apologize that the formatting is not allowing us to see these headlines. It says Legacy of Industrialized Warfare. And I don't know if you can see on the right here, these are a bunch of different colored ribbons. And what do we use colored ribbons for? Sorry?
Awards.
I can't hear you very well.
Awards.
Awards, we do for awards, yeah. These aren't for awards. These are for something else. You might see these on the back of cancer. Thank you. Types of cancer, right? Now, in my free time, I like to paint with oil. I love colors. Playing with colors is absolutely a lot of fun. Those of us connected to Waldorf education with Rudolf Steiner, we'll talk about that in a little bit, love playing with colors. But I'll tell you what, we're darn near running out of colors for the ribbons we need to identify the different types of cancers that our loved ones are suffering from. Okay, and there is a direct connection going on between the cancers and what we're doing with our food and agriculture and water. So we have a choice. And this is sort of simplifying some things, sure. But in essence, we each have a choice right now in front of us. And it is a choice between a death consciousness approach to how we do culture and a planetary, ecological, restoration, regenerative, sustainable, oriented consciousness. And yeah, I have lived in the Boulder area for a little while, well over 2 decades. And so maybe I'm a little weirder on the edge, but I'll tell you what, if someone has to wear a hazmat suit to spray stuff on the berries and vegetables I'm about to feed to my children, I'm going to stop and think about that for a second. That doesn't seem to add up in my book. Sorry?
Well, there's parts of the valley that are truly organic, and there's parts of the valley that are truly the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so it's fine, it just says action, because this whole thing's going to be about action anyway. This is a quote from Rudolf Steiner in 1924, right, 97 years ago. This comes from the period of time in his utterly prolific career as a writer and thinker and public speaker, in which he articulated the agriculture lectures, which essentially is the foundation of what we now call biodynamic agriculture. And in this pithy little statement, he is saying so much. I'll read it for you. And keep in mind, this was 97 years ago. He said, the most important thing is to make the benefits of our agricultural preparations available to the largest possible areas over the entire earth, so that the earth may be healed and the nutritive quality of its produce improved in every respect. This is a problem of nutrition. Nutrition as it is today does not supply the strength necessary for manifesting the spirit in physical life. A bridge can no longer be built from thinking to will and action. Food plants no longer contain the forces people need for this. So thinking and will and action seems pretty important, especially if we're considering enhancing our sovereignty in our community together. So let's talk about old Rudi for a few moments. By the way, the mainstream academic German scholarship establishment doesn't look at this guy much at all, or hasn't for most of the last several decades, because he's a bit out there. And some of you may be familiar that not only did he establish biodynamic agriculture, but he also established Waldorf, the Waldorf system of education. He also broke with the Theosophists and established what's called anthroposophy, which is an esoteric, philosophical, spiritual set of frameworks, if you will. Eurythmy is another thing that he created. And like many of the great early modern and modern German writers and thinkers, he has a profound sense of connection to Goethe, the writer from the Earth Submersion, with not far to run. And yes, India is building a huge wall, right? Like the global militaries, the global intelligence communities have been all over these risks for several decades and are responding in ways at times that are helpful and wise, and in ways at times that are having to deal with potential future scenarios that I hope none of us actually have to deal with. So here's a funny little, back to our humor, right? Humor, humus, humility, human. So can we help create a better future? And someone jumps up, so here's somebody giving a talk about all these benefits that occur when we come together in community and do things like build soil and create resilient, regenerative food systems, right? And transition away from fossil, highly toxic, by the way, energy sources to renewable energy sources. Here's a long list: energy independence, preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water, healthy children. Yeah, some naysayer in the audience gets up and says, well, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Now, sometimes I give talks on logic and public speaking. And I'm happy to chat with anybody afterward about some of the logic in all of this. Because we have a lot of divergent opinions out there in our culture right now. And it seems, from my perspective, that part of the challenge we're facing is that many of us are not successfully able to clear through a lot of the noise to get at the heart of what's really important, A, and B, what we can really be doing in terms of our own actions. Turns out the entire world is thinking about some of this. So these are the Sustainable Development Goals that our global community has developed through a body called the United Nations. And I don't see any black helicopters right now. The United Nations is where billions of us convene through representatives to work on helping alleviate a lot of these systemic challenges that we're facing. There are 17 agreed upon goals, and the ones that come out in highlighted squares are the ones that the Buyoneers community is most focused on. Good health and well-being, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, and number 17, my favorite, partnerships, meaning we get to work together and collaborate. So it's a lot more fun that way. So this brings me to the last few slides about what we're doing with the Buyoneers community: soil stewardship, climate action, culture of kindness. We have two pillars: thriving and sustainability. And we have books over in the tent as well. If any of you want to share your email with us, we're giving a 20% discount on everything, if that's helpful. That's a summit we had at the Star House outside Boulder about 2 years ago with some of our ambassadors. We didn't really have any summits this past year. A couple virtual things, but not so much in person. This is an idea of some of the ambassadors and farms and institutions and podcast guests that we're connected to right here in Colorado. Here's the United States, here's the world. This needs to be updated. And with the podcast series, we have the opportunity to interview and interact with a number of scientists, authors, farmers, indigenous leaders, youth activists, community leaders from all around the world. And we've now published, I think, 105 episodes. I encourage you to check it out. It's all at wyoneearth.org, video and audio. This episode 89 is with Dr. Yichao Rudi, one of the lead scientists in this regenerative soil movement through the Rodale Institute. And in that episode, he talks about this brand new white paper that was recently released called Regenerative Agriculture and the Soil Carbon Solution. We had a wonderful recent episode with a buddy of mine who's in the room here, Nick Chambers. Let's give it up for Nick. And Nick and I have known each other since middle school. So we've got dirt on each other. And we've had a lot of fun over the years. And one of the things I'm really proud of that Nick's been up to these last few years is helping lead Valley Roots Food Hub, which of course is one of the great organizations here at this gathering. It is doing so much to stitch together the fabric between farmers and producers and consumers and others in the community, getting more local, healthy food into more and more of our mouths and bellies, which is really appreciated. Recent episodes include 99, this is with David Beasley. He runs the World Food Program, which was awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. Is he distributing regenerative biodynamic food? No, he is not. Is he often the first and last line of defense for millions of people on the verge of starvation around the world? Yes. Is he concerned about what's happening right now in the world because of the convergence of climate change and COVID and supply chain disruption? Yeah. In this episode, you'll hear him talk about how he's really concerned that we've gone last year from 100 million of our brothers and sisters at risk of starvation to a projected 270 million in this year alone, primarily because of supply chain disruptions from COVID response. Lynn Bautz is in Switzerland. She's part of the leadership team at the Gritianum, which is the Steiner headquarters in the world, talking about the great work they're doing with biodynamics. So there are some beautiful, Sandy Karstens talks about sacred geometry and subatomic physics. So if some of you want to run down that rabbit hole a bit further, he's a good one to check out. We also recently interviewed John Liu, the founder of Ecosystem Restoration Camps. So this is a global movement of people organizing in locations all around the world to do things like build soil and plant trees and have fun together. And we're collaborating with some farms up near Boulder and Lyons to help establish the first ecosystem restoration camp in Colorado. The hope is we'll see a whole lot of these get established. Who knows, perhaps right here at Joyful Journey we'll be able to help get something like that organized. Last couple comments on the substance of what I wanted to share with you. We've been talking a lot about soil and seeds and food and our bodies and our microbiome. We only briefly mentioned economics, that dismal science, right? One of the things we probably all need to consider doing more together is transforming our economic system. And I believe we have a huge opportunity to move rapidly in the direction of regenerative, equity-based economics together. There's a lot of resistance. There are a lot of reasons why it might not work. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And one of the things I play with in the book Why on Earth, in the section dealing with economics, is a new way of thinking about how our economy actually works, introducing a fifth node in our traditional understanding of how value is created across different functions in any given value chain. And this fifth node is the quaternary node of stewardship and regeneration. So regardless of what we're trained to do, accounting, farming, making herbal medicine, right? Doing healing practices, regardless of what we're doing in the economy, we can also be part of this fifth node so that all of our actions and activities and efforts are in line with regenerative, sustainability-oriented, and stewardship-oriented business activities. We could have a much longer conversation about that. I want to point out this episode with John Fullerton, the founder of Capital Institute. He's one of the leading thinkers in the world right now on regenerative economics. It's very important. And by the way, economics is all made up. So, when we're talking about soil and chlorophyll, we humans didn't make that up. All the economic stuff, we humans made that up. Okay, so there's a very interesting opportunity there for all of us to participate in. So we mentioned some resources. This book, it's also available as an audiobook. We've got a series of children's books. Our newest, Celebrating Water, is hot off the press. We've got some copies here signed by the artist if you're interested. And we've got our Soil Stewardship Handbook. One thing I need to mention that I didn't mention earlier about soil, when we're building soil, we are collaborating with the microorganisms in the plants to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and to store it or sequester it in the ground. We say where it belongs, some of it, that extra stuff we've put up there, burning fossil fuels and so on. The interesting fact is, at the global scale, a 10% increase in soil carbon worldwide is equivalent to sequestering all of the fossil carbon we've released since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We can stabilize the planet, the atmosphere, through our regenerative action. That's why I'm so excited about things like ecosystem restoration camps and the kind of work that the Rodale Institute is doing. This is all in the process of scaling up all around the world by a whole lot of communities like ours, a whole lot of folks who, I don't think anyone in here is running one of the central banks. Maybe, raise your hand if you are, because we'll chat, right? But a whole lot of us are in the process of utterly transforming how we're taking care of this planet, and that includes the atmosphere. It includes the hydrosphere. It includes the economy. One of the other things we get to play with is creating social enterprises that help people's health and wellness and that are also generating economic revenue for nonprofits like the Y on Earth community. So Waylay Waters, you'll see over there, are soaking salts that we make. We're using CBD hemp grown by Colorado farmers on regenerative and biodynamic farms in these beautiful, lovely aromatherapy soaking salts. And pretty much everybody I know who has tried them, who has some sort of pain or trouble sleeping, says it's as effective as a massage. So when you're thinking about the value proposition of the price point, keep that in mind. But if you want to share your email, you'll get a 20% discount on that as well. Now, if you want to get into the techno cybersphere on all this, you can go to the homepage, wyonearth.org, throw in your name, your first name and email address, and you'll get this free Thriving in Sustainability guide and a discount on whatever you feel like buying. So these last 3 slides have 3 quotes I want to share with you. This one is from Carl Sagan, and it's a matter of perspective. Has anyone seen the movie Contact? All right, Jodie Foster, great movie. Yes. So Carl Sagan said, anything else you're interested in is not going to happen if you can't breathe the air and drink the water. Don't sit this one out. Do something. You are by accident of fate alive at an absolutely critical moment in the history of our planet. There's also a wonderful piece I want to share. Would anyone like to read something up here? Please. This is a piece called A Hopi Elder Speaks. And there's some debate as to its actual origin. If you don't mind standing over here, that would be wonderful. And I invite you to perhaps put your feet on the ground. If you'd like to, close your eyes and just listen to these words.
A Hopi elder speaks. You have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for the leader. Then he clasped his hands together, smiled, and said, this could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say, we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For doing that, if you would like, I'd love to give you one of the books. Thank you. What is your name, by the way?
My name is Val Valdez.
Val Valdez?
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Val.
Yeah.
And then this last thing I wanted to share. Is a poem I wrote about a year ago. And one of the things my son and I did last summer in COVID is published a book of poetry with his art in it. And he's an architecture student at the University of Colorado now, and that's one of his pieces there. And this is the final poem in this collection of poems, and it is called What If? So I want to leave on this note. What if humanity is on the brink of a great awakening? What if there is a pause? And what if awesome, humble, healing powers get activated among thousands of us, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? What if the great Veritas, the healing green biophotonic light, gets generated and transmitted across millions of nodes worldwide? What if Raphael and thousands of angels are here now to help us heal? Will you feel it? Will you see it? Will you be it? What if? Thank you.